Okay, Chairman, we're now live. Thank you.
Thank you. And a warm welcome to everybody this evening. A welcome to the virtual meeting of the Major Applications Planning HS2 Subcommittee of the London Borough of Hillingdon. This virtual meeting is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Steve Tuckwell, and I am the chairman of this evening's meeting. As this meeting is now on an online format, there are some online housekeeping rules that I will just go through for everybody present. Can I just ask that people ensure that any mobile phones around them are on silent? Could I ask if you are wearing a headset to ensure that your microphone is away from your mouth to avoid any noise? Please keep your microphone muted when not speaking, and then unmute when you are asked to speak. And only one person may speak at a time, and I as chairman will call those to speak. So those are the online housekeeping rules. As this is in a virtual format, I will need to do an attendance roll call to formally record people are actually in attendance virtually. So I will start with the Vice Chairman this evening, Councillor Lavery. Can you indicate if you're present? Thank you. Councillor Duncan, the Labour lead.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Brightman.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Hagger.
Present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Good evening, present, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Oswald.
Yeah, good evening, and I'm present.
Good evening. Okay, Liz, can you confirm that we've got a full house of members?
Yes, that's confirmed. Thank you.
Okay. I will need to do the same for the officers that are supporting this evening's meeting. So I'll start off with our planning officer, Ian Tyne.
Present, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Our head of planning, James Roger.
I'm present, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz Penny, our Democratic Services Officer.
Yes, I'm present. Thank you, Chairman.
And Raj Ola, our Legal Advisor and Borough Solicitor.
Raj, if you could just unmute your mic just to indicate that you're present.
My apologies. Yes, Chairman, I am present. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Raj. So, Liz, have we got a full house of officers supporting this evening?
We have indeed, yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. In terms of technical meeting control, I will announce that if any councillor leaves this virtual meeting partway through for a period of time through a lost connection, etc., I will, of course, continue the meeting unless we are not quorate, which is 3 councillors. Importantly, any councillor who does leave the meeting for a period of time will not be able to vote on that item that they are not present on. And Liz will keep an eye on that and inform me accordingly if any councillors drop out or not able to participate in a subsequent vote. Thank you.
Yes, I will. Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to the agenda this evening. But before I go to agenda item 1, apologies for absence, I'd just like to announce there's a slight change to the membership of the committee as was published. So I would like to formally welcome Councillor John Morgan to this committee. Welcome. And I'd like to, obviously, that is in replacement of Roy Chamdow, who is no longer on this committee. So welcome, Councillor Morgan. Okay, agenda item 1, apologies for absence. As we've just done the roll call, I don't think there are any, Liz?
No, there are no apologies tonight. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Okay, agenda item 2 is declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting. I'll just pause for a second and anybody shout out if they do have any declarations they wish to share. Okay, I take it that we have no declarations. Agenda item 3 is to receive and agree the minutes from the previous meeting of the 4th of March. Similar, I'll pause for a second. If there are any exceptions or any comments, I'll just pause and let people raise any points.
Mr. Chairman, I'll abstain from that vote.
Absolutely, Councillor Morgan. So if there's, we can take those minutes as agreed. Agenda item 4 this evening is matters that have been identified in advance or urgent, which there aren't any. And agenda item 5 is to confirm that all items tonight are in part 1 and will be considered in public. Okay, now on the agenda pack, you will see that we do have agenda item 6. As chairman, I have removed that item as it's not appropriate for this particular committee. and I'll pass over to Ian just to give us a bit of an explanation as to why that is. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. So before I commence the presentation of the main agenda item, it'd be just a useful reminder as to how we operate as a committee and how we use Schedule 17 submissions at the Council. So Schedule 17 submissions are best likened to reserved matters on a normal town and country planning application. The matters that are reserved are set out in Schedule 17 and they are heavily restricted. The Council has a strict 8-week deadline to determine such submissions. This can be extended in agreement with HS2 Limited, the nominated undertaker. As these are not town and country planning applications, though, there is no formal requirement to consult the public and no normal publicity requirements exist. So those are the significant changes from the town and country planning process. However, this council does open up the consultations as normal to allow for comments, and those get reported to the committee if they are received. So in terms of that, there are no speaking rights and no petition rights for these because they are not town and country planning applications. So these are specific to HS2, and we have our own constitutionally agreed with how they are processed. So that's why we don't hear petitions and we don't have speaking rights. That's true for both the applicant as well as any members of the public wishing to make representations. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that explanation, Ian. Very useful. Okay, we will move now on to agenda item 7. Members and officers will have seen that there has been some additional information come out on this particular item. It follows some new information that came out from HS2 very late yesterday, and as a result of that, there has been a slight change to the officers' recommendation. So you should have all have had that information in advance, and there are a couple of extra slides on Ian's presentation. So on that note, I'll hand over to you, Ian, to take us through. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to start the presentation now. So hopefully you can all see that. Can you see that, Chair?
Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you.
All right, excellent. All right. So this is a submission, item number 7. This is a submission under Schedule 17, Part 6 of the HS2 Act. HS2 is applying for consent to use Swakeleys Road and Harville Road for more than 24 large goods vehicles, that's LGVs in this context, to 2 different work sites. The work sites are on the same route. The Council is required under Schedule 17, Part 6 to consider the arrangements to be put in place if necessary. And those arrangements relate to the preservation of the local environment or local amenity, preservation or reduction in prejudicial effects on road safety or on the free flow of traffic, or to preserve a site of archaeological or historic nature, conservation. So in terms of this submission, it really is only the middle one that we're interested in. So it's prejudicial effects on road safety or the free flow of traffic in the local area. So it's the arrangements that relate to that particular material consideration. There are 2 primary matters when considering whether to impose specific arrangements. Firstly, the arrangements ought to be modified. So in simple terms, this means we need evidence to demonstrate why we think the arrangements need to be modified. And this would, in terms of movements of vehicles, would best be in the form of technical evidence. This is generally a problem for the Council because HS2 Limited don't generally provide evidence of their own. So either the Council has evidence readily available, has to secure additional evidence, or has to rely on alternative, less reliable source of evidence, which HS2 Limited generally has a concern with. Secondly, that any modification to the HS2 Limited arrangement proposed by the Council are reasonable. That is to say that they can be reasonably modified. So that is the context for considering tonight's item 7. So I'll crack on with the rest of the presentation. So slide 1, this is the route to be taken by the LGV movement, more than 24 a day. 2 work sites there. Compound site access just south of the Chiltern line off Harville Road, and construction site access just north of the Chiltern lines, up north of Hillingdon Outdoor Activity Centre and north of New Year's Green Lane, again off to the west of Harville Road. Slide 2, that's just the route showing you the way that they come out of that. So that is access left out of the compound site access and right, importantly right, out of construction site access, and that is right onto the road of Harville, right onto Harville Road into oncoming traffic. So that is a concern that we'll consider in more detail in due course. Now, just to give you a little bit of context as to why all these lorries are moving around, it's a slightly messy slide, but the intention is just to give you an understanding as to why we're moving lorries around the route and what the current works are supposed to support, just to assist with decision making, just to give a nice context for those interested. So currently there are a number of pylons that run across Harville Road and then ultimately across the Hoac Lake and then down along the Grand Union Canal. You can see that on the slide represented by the dashed yellow line. Unfortunately, that alignment clashes directly with the viaduct, which is the black and white line shown over the Hoac Lake. So the highest point of HS2 in this area with low overhead lines. Consequently, they've got to be shifted. Now, it's been through a bit of a rigmarole finding the ultimate alignment. That new alignment is the red line with the dotted line as well. So not the wider red area to the right of the screen. And that is due to get over the lowest part of the HS2 line. Pylons require hefty substructures and significant foundations. The LGV movements are predominantly linked to the removal of broken up foundations and the material to import more aggregate to form new foundations. There's also delivery of the actual structures themselves, which come in kit form and get built up on site. So there's quite a lot of activity associated with moving 6 or 7 pylons, getting rid of 6 or 7 and replacing with 6 or 7 more to get this new alignment in. So that's the context, Chair. The sites there are marked 1 and 2. 2 is the compound access just to the east of Harville Road, and 1 is the main construction access off Harville Road to the west. Now you can already see this aerial, slightly out of date, but still broadly in keeping with HS2 activity as things stand. You see quite a lot of HS2 activity and work sites in the area. You'll also see the Dogs Trust, the HOAC, and civic amenity site. So quite a lot now going on in that area that is relatively new. So at this point, there's a slight change to the original presentation that was circulated. This is because last night we received an update of the program. Now, before you, there's a slide showing 2 different charts. The black chart, or the black lines on the charts represent the previous submission, the submission that was made in December 2019, that is before this committee in effect. The red represents the update that we received last night from HS2 Limited, or from the contractors working on behalf of HS2 Limited. So what has happened is, because of COVID-19 and various other masses, that the project has, as part of the project, has slipped somewhat. So we've needed to update the charts as to when the vehicle movements happen. Now, the problem that we've run into is that because there's been a shift in the program, the site operators National Grid have lost a lot of predominant access to the compound access site. So that's the one on the southern end, site number 2, to the east of Harville Road, just south of the Chiltern line. So they no longer have access to that site in the same way as originally presented. Consequently, most of their movements will now be going to the main access. So that's site number 1, west of Harville Road, up near New Year's Green Lane. Originally, what was intended was that there'd be 50 movements to that site and 40 movements to the compound access south of the Chiltern line. Problem is now that they're all merged together to go to one particular site by a small number that you can see there in May 2020, June 2020, July 2020. So there is now a more intensive use of site number 1, which is a concern for the council, and also a concern for officers, certainly. So cumulatively, as opposed to having 50 movements a day at that particular site, we're now dealing with 100. So these movements here are in and out. So that's 50 in, 50 out at its peak, give or take. So it's about 95. So you can see the peak activity there happening around July, August, September time of this year, and then another peak towards the end as they pack up and leave away. So that's obviously a concern. That's 100 movements into one site just off Harville Road in a particularly concerning area. So we've got it's a fast-flowing area of traffic at that point. Vehicles are clear of the rest of the HS2 work sites, building up speed before they get to Harefield, and this would be a lot of slow-moving vehicles moving across fast-moving traffic. So that's an obvious concern. On a brighter note, this doesn't quite correlate with the wider body of traffic that HS2 is putting elsewhere to do their main work. So this national grid traffic is broadly coming on stream now, and will hit its peak at around month 8, month 9 of the main works. So these are the traffic movements from the previous submission that we heard back in March, which is for the main body of HS2 traffic movements. So I just wanted to give the committee some comfort that these movements are not going to come on stream at the same time as the rest of the major body of traffic associated with HS2 works. Notwithstanding that, there is obviously a concern about moving those vehicles onto and off that highway at that particular point. So in summary, these are limited ancillary lorry movements to the main work. The movements associated with the main works are subject to an appeal. No evidence available that movements at this level traffic, so i.e. 100 movements a day at this particular area for a very short period of time relative to the rest of the project, would cause prejudicial effects on the free flow of traffic themselves, so in terms of congestion. The concerns around access, though, are now come to a head. There'll be double the amount of slow-turning vehicles moving across fast-moving traffic that is approaching Harefield, and free of any other restrictions from any other work sites and turnings, as I mentioned. So there is a concern about safe movement of vehicles, and also whether or not those vehicles would end up queuing on the road or causing delays to other road users. As this information was only presented last night, it sort of leaves us into a difficult position. So the recommendation is 2 options, Chair. So we can either defer to allow HS2 Limited to provide more details on the access arrangements. We don't have enough sufficiently. Or alternatively, the council can request a condition to secure further details relating to the access arrangements. And that condition would be similar to what we put on last time. So prior to the use of the roads for more than 24 lorry movements per day, a scheme for the arrangements, e.g. banksmen, stop and go signs, holding areas, used at the accesses to the worksite shall be submitted and approved in writing by the Highways Authority, i.e. the council. And this is to secure a safe working arrangement at that site. We think that this condition is capable of reasonably capable of modifying the existing arrangements, and we think it ought to, given the obvious concerns around safety. However, it would be opportune for us to give HS2 the chance to provide a response to the concerns in this condition. Officers' opinions are if they can come up with arrangements that negate the need for a condition, that would be preferable, not least because, generally speaking, HS2 Limited do not agree to the imposition of conditions. And in that environment, normally, if they do not agree to the imposition of a condition, the officer recommendation is for refusal, and that would result in an appeal. So they are the 2 options there, Chairman, as far as officers are concerned, deferral or a condition. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Very informative presentation. I'm sure members have got a number of questions on the back of what the information you've just shared. Before we go around to members, though, I'm going to bring in Raj to give an opportunity for him to share his insight from a legal perspective. So over to you, Raj.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. As you've heard from Ian Thine, there was a change to the proposed arrangements which were only communicated to him late yesterday, and a concern has now arisen that there is more intensive use of the access to the north of the site in question. Given the very short notice that has been given to the council, it has not been possible to ascertain whether High Speed 2 Limited will agree to a condition being attached to approval of the application. It's very important to note that for these type of applications, which fall under paragraph 6 of Schedule 17, the consent of High Speed 2 Limited is required before the subcommittee can impose a condition. If the subcommittee was minded to impose a condition, it would also have to be satisfied that the arrangements ought to be modified and are reasonably capable of being so modified to prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety or on the free flow of traffic in the local area. As Ian has indicated in his presentation, there are two options open to members, deferral or imposing a condition which he has read out. Now, obviously, it is for members to decide, but there are some advantages in members agreeing to defer this particular application. It would demonstrate that the council is acting reasonably. It would give an opportunity to High Speed 2 Limited to put forward its proposals for alternative arrangements. And certainly for the time being, it would obviate the possibility of a further appeal being made by High Speed 2 Limited. There have already been 2 appeals from High Speed 2 Limited against decisions of this committee in relation to lorry route approvals. And whilst that, isn't, a massive consideration, it is nonetheless important that the subcommittee does not unnecessarily invite appeals against its decisions. There is also a slight uncertainty in the current law. I have recently appraised members of the judicial review case, which was brought in the High Court, and it was heard in December of last year, which the council lost. And the basic premise of that application was that the council was aggrieved that High Speed 2 Limited was not submitting sufficient information in support of its Schedule 17 applications. And the decision went against the council, but we have sought permission from the Court of Appeal to appeal. And we are awaiting a hearing date, which isn't imminent because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But nevertheless, the point I'm trying to make here is that the law is not settled in this area, and there is an opportunity in the future for it to be clarified. And I'm hopeful that that decision may go in the council's favour. Just to end what I want to say, my understanding, having spoken to Ian, is that the 8-week period for determination of this application has now expired. And as he said in his presentation, we have to determine applications within 8 weeks or agree an extension in writing with High Speed 2 Limited. It's not been possible, given the short notice we've been given, to agree an extension with High Speed 2 Limited for the time being. But if they were to lodge an appeal on the grounds of non-determination by the subcommittee within the 8-week period, I think they'd be very hard pressed to justify that appeal in light of the fact that it's they who've come to the council and presented information, different information to them at the 11th hour. That's all I really wanted to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Raj, for your insight. Yeah, and I was going to ask about the non-determination timescales, and you've outlined them very well, and that should be clear for members to deliberate over. Just to paraphrase a couple of points there, I mean, we are looking at the more intensive use for the north site and the impact on traffic flows that will have, and we need to make sure that we're absolutely satisfied that those access concerns are addressed and that we have safe movement of vehicles. Subsequent to that, though, we have less than just over a day's notice for these changes, and Raj has outlined, and I think Ian's outlined as well, the advantages that come with a deferral to give the opportunity for HS2 to provide further information about how they're going to mitigate that risk and that on that access point, but also demonstrates Hillingdon's reasonableness in looking at such matters. So that's the points I wanted to raise, but I'll open it up now for members to to ask questions. So I'll start with the Vice Chairman, Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly not an ideal position to be placed in with late information. And if this wasn't a HS2 application, we almost certainly would have pulled it off an agenda and had that information properly considered by officers and the applicant. I would share the concern that whilst the number of lorry movements, I think, is not a major concern in the sense that I don't think we're going to be able to do anything with that volume. The access certainly is, because that's a large volume of vehicles coming out onto Harville Road. And as the officer pointed out, this is a high-speed part of Harville Road with traffic accelerating out of Harefield and also accelerating away from the main HS2 site. So for those reasons, I don't think the current arrangements have demonstrated the safety that we would need to see. I think it is reasonably capable of being satisfied. I would share the concern with using the condition approach, because that does, as we know, HS2 don't like agreeing these things, and that does give them yet another opportunity to stick an appeal in. And we could do without that at this point, particularly as the legal officer has identified the law needs some clarification. So for me, I think the presentation is entirely clear. I don't have any questions. I understand the issue. It's a right turn onto Harville Road. I, for my part, at this point, would be in favour of the deferral option to give HS2 a chance to supply us with some further information, given it was their late submission or their agent's late submission that's placed us in this position. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. Were you moving deferral?
I am happy to move deferral.
Okay, right. Thank you, Councillor Lavery. We'll go on to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't really have anything to add. I agree with what Councillor Lavery has said. If we go down the route of condition, we're told that HS2 don't accept conditions, they appeal. This would be another appeal that we would have to deal with. That doesn't really help anything. They've submitted information very late. If we defer this and give them an opportunity to agree something, that's going to be in the interests of safety at this site for everybody using that road, for local residents or anybody else. So I think in the interests of safety, I would like to second a deferral. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Okay, we'll go around and take any questions that other members might have for officers. And we'll start with Councillor Brightman.
I have nothing to add, Mr. Chairman. I agree with both of my colleagues.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brightman. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've possibly got a little bit more experience on the Harville Road, because today I actually did visit our civic site and to remove some rubbish. And the hour and a half that I was in the queue on the Harville Road, a couple of times vehicles came out of that north entrance wanting to turn right, but there is a left-only sign coming out of that site. So really they should be turning left and going up round the roundabout and back down again if they wanted to go in the opposite direction. Whilst I was there, because the queue, there was a queue on the Heathrow Road to go onto the site, it was to we had two guys who were manning stop-go boards, and a number of vehicles ignore those signs and think they can go straight on down. So if we're then looking at increasing the heavy goods vehicles to 50 vehicles a day, at the current situation, we're just asking for trouble. So I think we do have to go with a deferral, but I think we've got to look at how we've got Harville Road working at the moment due to the COVID-19.
Okay, Thank you, Councillor Morgan. I'll invite Councillor Hagger if you've got any questions for officers.
Thank you, Chair. No questions, but completely agree with my colleagues for a deferral. I think that is definitely the sound advice and certainly what we should be doing, especially highlighting actually what Councillor Morgan's very important point with COVID-19 as well, and the restrictions we have anyway trying to get access to residents, trying to get access to the site. So yes, that would definitely for me a deferral. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hagger. Councillor Oswald, have you any questions for officers?
No, I think I agree with what's already been said, Chairman. I think it's deferral. I think that's probably the best way forward. Yeah, I'll stick with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oswald. Okay, I think that probably draws the debate to a natural conclusion. I can confirm that we have Councillor Lavery has moved that we defer this item. That has been seconded by Councillor Duncan. So I'll go around now and take a vote. Councillor Lavery, as you moved, I take it you're for deferral?
Indeed.
Councillor Brightman?
For, Chairman.
Councillor Hagger?
For, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan?
For the deferral, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan, you seconded, but I guess you're for deferral?
I am for deferral. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Oswald?
Yeah, for deferral, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I make that 6 yeses for deferral. Liz, can you confirm?
Yes, that's confirmed. 6 votes.
So I can confirm that agenda item 7 on this evening's agenda is deferred. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for that. We will now swiftly move on to agenda item 8, which is a complex application, and there's lots of content in here. So we'll let Ian take us through that one. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Right, hopefully you can all see that again. So item 8, land north of the Chiltern Main Line and east of the River Pin, west of High Road and Ickenham Road in Ruislip. It's actually quite a complicated application. This is broadly the red line that we're dealing with here. It's, as you can see, it pretty much runs parallel with the Chiltern line as it currently stands and takes into part of the Ruislip Golf Course. So there are several aspects to this, all covered under Schedule 17, but various different parts. So the first part is building works under Schedule 17, paragraph 2, and that is for the West Ruislip portal, and that's including the ventilation slots, the portal head house, and the substation building. There are also earthworks to create some of the building works. So there's the West Ruislip portal hood, a section of the West Ruislip retained embankment, retaining walls and ecological ponds in the golf course. Accompanying that, noise barriers alongside the new route, a road vehicle parking area, it's referenced as in HS2 Act, Schedule 17, paragraph 3, fencing and walls, but again, as with previous submissions, it's only the alignment that the council's interested in or can consider, not the type of fencing wall. And finally, artificial lighting equipment. This is predominantly used to light the access road to the head house. So quite a complicated submission. Hopefully I'll be able to explain it in simple terms. Happily take questions at the end. So there's broadly the red line. We don't need to see the writing on there, but I just want to give you a feel for the broad plans there. So you can see the ponds here. You've got the head house structure here, the access route moving down towards the same road that's served for the golf course. Then you've got the portal hood section here, just in front of the head house, and then the open section. So essentially, this is the bit that transitions HS2 from the tunnel that is goes all the way under London, all the way out to Euston, and transitions it to the open air where it then goes above ground on the viaduct before getting to the M25 and then going underground again. So the only open air section in London. And this is the transition. So in terms of the bits that I will present at the minute, the first bits are the red block. So that is the building works for the head house and a variety of other bits and pieces that you'll see above ground. The yellow section on your plan, on the plan in front of you, that's the hood. So that's the transition bit. That's a ventilated hood. I'll come on to that in a bit more detail. And then you get the open expanse, which ultimately terminates at the start of an embankment. That embankment will be the subject of a second package of submissions coming down the line. Something to look forward to. So in the first bit, the red bit, I'm going to look at the substation, the head house, the portal hood, the car park, and the lighting. So I'm going to deal with all those matters at the same time. So for building works, Schedule 17, paragraph 2, this is what is open to consideration. So as I said before, these are effectively reserved matters. And what has been reserved to be dealt with by the local planning authority is the design or external appearance of the building. So the normal rules governing town and country planning acts do not apply. We're only interested in the design or external appearance. And in particular, whether or not they can be modified to preserve the local environment or local amenity, to prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety or the free flow of traffic, to preserve a site of archaeological or historic interest or nature conservation value. And importantly, for building works, the council can demonstrate that the development ought to and could reasonably be carried out elsewhere within development limits. So if I come to the head house, substation, car park to start with. So the substation, you can see on this plan, this little small box here. This is near the maintenance access. So this is a relatively minor structure. So in terms of council's consideration, officers do not have any concerns with the substation in this location. It's part of what is effectively now going to be a relatively built-up part of HS2. It will fit within the new setting, which will be the head house, which I'll come on to in a bit more detail, and the access road and all the ancillary equipment that goes alongside that. So that's the fencing and things like that. So it's important to note that this was the principle of head house portal going here has been approved by Parliament. So we have very limited scope for being able to start playing around with the actual red line plan where this is all located. So we're just really interested in the design. Officers don't have an opinion on the design of the substation. It is what it is. If we were to reach the conclusion that it was harmful to the setting of the area, we would then have to demonstrate how it could be changed. I think that would be a little excessive, given that I think the setting of the substation is perfectly acceptable in its new location there. The head house, you'll see the big grey block there. That's head. I'll come on to that in a bit more detail. But then the car park, or the road vehicle parking as it's referred to in the HS2 Act, there's about 800 metres of hard standing around there. That's important to understand what the head house does. The head house is also a ventilation area. It is also evacuation point in case of an emergency. So it's direct access down to the tunnel area. This means that in the event of an emergency, all the trains would have to evacuate and people would be squirreled up this area and onto the hard standing. So that's the context for the hard standing. So again, if we were to determine that it was incongruous in the area, we would then have to demonstrate how it could be remedied. And that would, again, I would say, be difficult given that it's been designed to fit the specifications of HS2 operations, i.e. big enough to hold a significant amount of people and also to attend to emergency vehicles as well. So in that regard, the officers have no concerns or reasons for objections to the road vehicle park, car park as we can call it, the hard standing area. Now to the head house itself. So this is where some of the plans get a little bit complicated. So I've tried to simplify this. So imagine if you're standing in the middle of the driving range on the golf course, you can see that on the yellow arrow, looking out towards the Greenway in southwest. you will see that structure at the top. So this is a new structure. This is the existing ground level, the grey dotted line. So all this is the new structure to be built above it. So you've got the security fence. You can see the substation, relatively minor feature. The big security fence. Then you've got the proposed ground level of which the access road would be on, and then along to the head house structure itself. Now, imagine you've moved yourself from the golf course and you've somehow managed to breach the security fence and you're looking directly down the tunnel. This is what you would see before the high-speed trains came out the tunnel. So you can see now that this is the transition. So you can see the high-speed trains just emerging underneath the head house there, and they will be underneath the ground level, the new ground level. The old ground level is the red dotted line. So you can see the head house on top. You don't need to see the measurements there because I've got them hopefully on the next slide. So there's the structure again, looking at it from the golf course side, nearly 10 meters in height, 26.7 meters wide. Not a small structure by any stretch of the imagination. So 9 stories, 9 meters relative to about 3 stories, 2.5 stories. These are some of the visuals of it. It's not an entirely undesigned structure. So we've seen lots worse. It could just be covered in concrete. So there's been in fact, I would say a good attempt to put it neatly within the landscape. It's got several material finishes which I think are fit sympathetically within the landscape. We'll come on to those in a bit more detail. But this gives you an indication of the size and the bulk of it. Typical HS2 plan. So right at the top is the current situation as you're standing on Ickenham High Road looking down the Chiltern line. So you see a nice group of trees. They will be removed, and that is where the new access road to the head house will be. And you can just see at the end of that access road, roughly if you can see where the pointer is, a box which is the head house itself. So that's on opening. 15 years after opening is the situation at the end. So there's more landscaping. It's basically been set to the other side of the access road, leading all the way down to the head house, which is broadly covered from this perspective anyway by the maturing trees. The image from the golf course itself. So you'll see at the in the middle structure again, that's on opening. So roughly on about the first tee, I think it is at the minute, where this angle is, the camera angle is taken from, and you can see a wealth of landscaping emerging at the middle section. So that's on opening, and then you can clearly see the head house structure right in front of you. So you can see it's big and bulky, but has got quite a nice sympathetic finish to it, which officers are generally supportive of. And then 15 years later, you can see the landscape has grown up around it. So from the golf course, which will be returned to a 9-hole golf course, well, you can barely see the head house, assuming that this actually materializes in reality. But that's the intention. So you can see it's fitting within the landscape in time. Unfortunately, from the other perspective, though, it's not so great. The Chiltern line is actually sort of sits on the side of the back of people's properties. So you can see that image on the left-hand side. You can see the Chiltern trains just chugging along there. And then the image on opening behind. I haven't got an operational, I haven't got a 15-year one. So this is on operation, on opening. And you can see the structure quite clearly from the back of the properties on the Greenway. So it is quite a bulky structure from this perspective, and officers are generally supportive of the structure itself. But what we're going to try, what we're seeking to do through a planning condition, which I'll come to right at the end, is to see if we can secure further amendments to that particular elevation, just to try and soften it a bit more given that it's quite a bulky structure from some of these properties. And bearing in mind, this is just one property. So I think from that context, in the scope of HS2 and what we can consider under paragraph 2 of Schedule 17, we think that there is a problem with the setting on the local amenity and how the outlook looks for some of these property owners on the Greenway. So again, just going to the finishes, it has got a green roof, but again, that would be of no comfort for those who are at a level below that on the Greenway. It's a timber clad finish with some brickwork and some stainless steel meshing. So I think in general, quite supportive of the way that it's been designed. We think that there's an opportunity to soften it further. And then just going back to the lighting, we're required to improve the lighting or seek to modify it so that we're considering the lighting with respect to the emission of light and whether or not it ought to and could reasonably be modified to preserve the local environment or local amenity. So the lighting is relatively low level. It's along the access road to the head house. But the head house is not a 24/7 man structure, although it will have there will be security detail there on a regular basis, and as I understand it, maintenance will be there routinely as well. These lighting is generally come on when vehicles approach, so it's not on permanently, and you can see the low level of lighting, see the emissions spreading out. So in this area, you can remember that next to this particular part of the line, you've got Ickenham High Road here, which sits above the structure, and then you've got the Chiltern Railway line here before you get to the Greenways. So officers do not envisage that this lighting would be on permanently and therefore be problematic to people on the Greenways. And the level of lighting is generally considered to be quite low. So that deals with the building works and the portal structure and that first half of that first third of the submission. The second third is the tunnel portal head itself. So originally this was just, in the environmental statement, was proposed to be just a concrete slab, which under one of the addendums to the environmental statement got lengthened, which the council is broadly supportive of, because the longer this is, then the shorter the area is that is in open air, and that means less noise. So the longer the hood, the better. And the hood is a solid structure with ventilation holes in it. You've all might have heard the phrase of tunnel boom or sonic boom, as high-speed trains emerge from a tunnel, and it brings with it a great energy, a great amount of air. So the ventilation points within this hood are designed to disperse that air energy and in turn the noise, so that there isn't a sudden enormous belch of noise, if that's the correct phrase. Apologies, Chair. So what does this look like in detail? Well, this is the start of the hood. So this is further down from the head house. So this is now almost at ground level. So the existing red line is the ground level. You can see the trains are at that level, but there is now a structure on top of that. So that's the hood. And the hood has ventilation holes in it and steep retaining walls either side. So forgive me, Chair, it's slow to turn the slides over. So looking at this in plan or from the side on, artist's impression, the bit that we're talking about is the bit in the rectangle from the head house to the tunnel portal opening. So it's this section in between. And what you can see is this hood is not a incongruous concrete structure. It has actually been planted up. So it is effectively a green tunnel of sorts, and within this tunnel on top of here you'll have the ventilation holes where the air emerges. So this is a welcome improvement from where we were with the environmental statement. The arrow line shows roughly where the train's coming up above ground, up to the above ground section. So it's quite a nice finish in terms of what we could have expected. So officers are broadly content with this. And then I should also remember to point you out that if we were unhappy with this, the council would have to go about seeking an alternative design to a high-speed tunnel hood, which is a tall order indeed, and obviously we don't have high-speed designers in-house, so the expertise is limited to that. But I think in general terms, I don't think that there is a problem with this part of the structure. So before we even get to the situation of whether or not we did need to redesign it or consider redesign of it, I think it's generally considered to be an appropriate part of the scheme. So if I just scroll back up, so as we leave the tunnel portal hood, we go into this section at the end. So this section is the open air section. Now, the section that we're concerned here for this Schedule 17 submission is effectively the noise screens, noise barriers as we would call them. So that's what we're being asked to consider at this particular point. And in terms of noise, it's the same sort of standard text, whether the design or external appearance of the noise screens ought to and could reasonably be modified to preserve the local environment and local amenity. Not sure how these noise screens would affect road safety, but that's open to us, and also to preserve a site of archaeological or historic interest or nature conservation value. The development does form part of a scheduled work, so that last section does not is not relevant. So in terms of this, it's more to do with the local environment, local amenity. Now, the noise of HS2 trains was a significant issue during the parliamentary stages. It generated a lot of concern and is a highly technical issue. It's also something that we've never had to contend with in this country, and there are very, very few precedents across the world for a high-speed line train travelling at 250 miles out of a porous tunnel into an open area, rural area, as we've got here. So that's the concern we've got. So the approach that was taken in the environmental statement was they set a threshold for noise, and that threshold was determined by HS2 Limited and Parliament, and that is the threshold that they have to attain. Council cannot impose restrictions on high speed 2 below that threshold. That is the approved level that we have to reach. However, there is obviously concerns about whether or not that threshold is accurate and whether or not it is attained through the actual operation of HS2. Remember, it has all been done on modelling, and modelling is not always that accurate. So here's the noise barrier itself. So we've got the retained structure here, keeping up the tunnel portal hood, and as the train comes out, we've got a 5 metre high noise barrier here. So it's quite a significant structure this side of the HS2 line. So that's the Greenway side. There's a 3 metre high barrier on the other side. The height of the noise barrier is dictated by residential receptors, effectively, or other sensitive noise receptors. Golf course is not a sensitive noise receptor. The residents of the Greenway are. So you can imagine you're stood basically at this blue arrow looking down the line now. So that's where we are. So effectively what this does is the last section of the Greenway is the section that will see this particular part of the scheme. Most of the others will either see the green tunnel hood or the head house structure, as we've already seen. So here's a bit more detail. So you've got the noise barrier here next to the catenary, which is yet to be designed. It's not shown on the images with much clarity. But you've got the noise barrier here, so it's 5 metres high to the Greenway. The Greenway is not shown on this particular part of the diagram. And then, sorry, 2.5 metres, I said 3. 2.5 metres this side, facing onto the golf course. And then you can see the extent of the railway, the security fence one side, and the security fence the other side. We'll have the Chiltern main line here. So what does this mean in more context? Again, it's not overly clear, but this is that the plans become a little less obvious here in terms of landscape. But certainly from the golf course side, the council has next to no concerns with the height of the noise barrier here or the impact that the noise barrier would have. That's because the golf course side will all be planted up. So in time, the landscape section will prevent any overseeing of that noise barrier. The concerns are a bit more heightened for the greenway, purely because it's a 5 metre high noise barrier. Now, in their wisdom, HS2 Limited presented this as an image representing what you would see of the noise barriers from the greenway. They took the viewpoint from the middle of the turning circle there at the end of the greenway. They might easily well have stayed at home and taken the photo with the lens cap on. It is of no use whatsoever. That image should have been taken from someone's back garden or from an alternative position where they could have access to. So that is frankly completely irrelevant as far as we're concerned, which does generate a concern. And that concern is a 5 metre high noise barrier at the back of these properties. It's difficult to understand exactly what the impact would be. So I cannot confirm whether that ought to be changed or whether there ought to be some alternative solution. Next step is, if we did determine that there was too much of an impact, could we reasonably expect it to be different? Now, there's a trade-off here. A smaller noise barrier means extreme levels of noise for these residents. A larger noise barrier may be slightly incongruous in terms of visual impact, but it does have the benefit of reducing, so the modelling tells us, noise levels in this area to an acceptable level. So in terms of should it change, should it be altered, I definitely think it would have an adverse impact. Would it be reasonably expected to be able to present something different to the noise barrier that still maintains the noise mitigation as well as being a better visual fit? Officer opinion is no. We're not into designing noise barriers for high-speed lines. So this was an issue that was taken through Parliament. The designs are out now. The noise barrier hasn't changed in height. Parliament signed off a 5 metre high noise barrier in this instance. The council and residents made representations on the fact that it was an incongruous and unsightly bit of kit, but it was still approved. And I maintain that the noise barrier, although it would be visually intrusive, is better as a 5 metre noise barrier, keeping out noise, than it is impacting on the visual element from several properties at the end of the greenway. So just to summarise that in context before I get to the earthwork section. So you can see this is a map of the golf course. Obviously, you've got the existing HS2 works as they stand at the minute. This is a potential haul road, and effectively HS2 will run in between that haul road area and the children line. So a lot of those trees will go, but there'll be a new planning application for a 9-hole golf course, which will improve visual amenity at this side and improve the landscaping. In terms of impact on the greenway, which is obviously the major sensitive receptor here, there are 3 elements to it. You've got the first section, which is the head house structure. We've already looked at that. We think it's designed as best it can. There'll be landscaping the other side of it, which will soften it, and we've recommended a condition to improve it slightly further. Then you have the yellow section, protecting most of the residents of the greenway. That yellow section is effectively the green tunnel, the porous tunnel, the portal hood, which has been landscaped and designed to fit within the existing setting. Then you have the open section, which is the concern. That's the area that has the noise barrier. So that's effectively the first bit of open stretch. It would be extremely useful if HS2 had continued this tunnel hood all the way out to here. Council did make representations to that effect, but that was not deemed a reasonable amount of cost. So in theory, we could make that representation now, but I doubt that would have any legs. So this is the area of concern. I've made the point about the offset between noise barrier or landscape. As a consequence, the amount of receptors impacted in this area, as you can see, it could have been a lot worse. It is a reduced amount, And I think the noise barriers are necessary to protect them from a much worse level of harm. So just going to the earthworks, just wrapping it up. Again, we've had earthworks submissions before, so that the design or external appearance of the works ought to and could reasonably be modified to preserve the local environment or local amenity, to prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety, free flow of traffic, and to preserve a site of archaeological or historic interest. So the earthworks in this area relate to the portal hood section in the middle, and the works to the underneath the retained embankment near to the noise barriers, as well as the ecological ponds. So in terms of the earthworks alongside the Chiltern lines, there are no concerns with that. We have to build a high-speed railway, and in terms of the design and external appearance of that, you know, it is what it is. The works to the tunnel portal hood in the middle, the actual earthworks to facilitate that, are actually welcome because we think it reduces the impact. So that's a positive. And then the other structures are purely engineering. So again, the council would have to go to some lengths to demonstrate that those engineering works could be different. The ponds are a slightly different issue. The ponds are on the golf course. You can see the ponds there. I mean, in theory, they could go anywhere. But again, the council has no general concerns with that approach to where the ponds are located. These are ecological ponds which will benefit a diverse wildlife habitat in future. So again, if they're going anywhere, there's no harm in them going there. The golf course is being reconfigured anyway, so there's no impact on local amenity. So again, I don't have too much of a problem with that. Glass Greater London Archaeological Advisory Service give our comments on archaeological impacts, and you'll recall that the very first application, one of the first applications we dealt with, they objected because there wasn't enough information. They're satisfied with the level of information here, that archaeological investigations can be carried out and that the impacts will be low. So in terms of these ponds, no major concerns, although the issue is how they fit within the existing mature landscape. So there are some mature trees in the area. That's not before this committee, so we've recommended an informative for that to be discussed in a bit more detail. The ponds also link to a wider issue with drainage. Again, not before this committee tonight, so there's an informative that we end up sorting that out at a later date. Obviously, there's quite a lot of activity in this area in close proximity to the River Pin, which does have flooding problems. A lot of changes to landform and reconfiguration of the golf course, so we just need to make sure that it all fits in without increasing the risk of flooding to others. So there's an informative that should be secured. And that's just a cut section of where the ponds are. So in terms of fencing, that's one of the last elements of this. Again, only the route of the fencing is up for discussion, up for debate with this committee. The type of fencing is irrelevant, but this is just an image just to show you the kind of fencing that we're talking about. It's a secure fencing to stop people getting onto the head house area and then ultimately onto the high-speed line. So nothing out there in terms of a railway going through a relatively rural setting. I should just point out that the landscaping that you've seen, while some of it looks nice and well designed, that is still open for approval. So those discussions are ongoing. So whilst the landscaping is relied on to form some mitigation to the visual impacts, it is not yet properly secured. That will happen at a later point. So in terms of recommendations, Chair, you'll be glad to know I've nearly finished. So in terms of the building works and the head house design, we've recommended approval subject to one condition, to seek some form of softening through living walls or living screens. All other building works are recommended for approval as submitted. In terms of the earthworks, we've recommended an informative relating to the drainage as discussed, and an informative relating to the tree protection around the ecological ponds. In terms of the noise screens, this is a slightly different. This is probably going to be a slightly controversial condition for HS2 Limited, but as things stand at the minute, this council has nothing before it to say that there's going to be an adequate monitoring and reporting regime to this authority. As I said before, those noise screens are based on modelling work. As a slight anecdote, I once was out on site with a flood engineer at the time when there was flooding up in Leeds, and we were stood in a car park that was basically covered in water, and he said that water shouldn't be there because his modelling told him that water shouldn't be there, but we both saw it with our own eyes. So in terms of the modelling, we all know what modelling can do. It's basically a prediction. You know, predictions are best based on precedent. There is no precedent for this, so we are somewhat scrabbling in the dark on this one. So the council is really concerned that the noise of this HS2, particularly leaving that tunnel area, particularly for the residents at the end of the greenways who've got a 5 metre noise barrier, 5 metre high noise barrier, if that doesn't work, or if they get noise levels above what was predicted, then there is a real threat to their livelihood, to their well-being. So the amenity of the local residents. So we put a condition on, or recommended a condition for monitoring and reporting, and then agreeing triggers as to what would happen after that. Now, the obvious solution, and this would be a reasonable modification to the arrangements, would be to extend existing mitigation measures for noise protection. So some of the residents in that area will receive internal noise insulation, similar to what you get around Heathrow Airport. That was approved by Parliament. Now, if that's not adequate, then we suspect that there would have to be some similar measures for more residents, or alternative measures to be looked at. So that's all that condition is doing. And then in terms of fencing, the car park and the lighting, approval as permitted. So that is it, Chair. Sorry it took so long, but it was quite a complicated submission. Thank you very much.
Okay, no, thank you, Ian. A very complex set of circumstances, an awful lot of content, but you've laid that out very well for members to ask some questions on. So well done. Okay, before we go to members, I am going to again invite Raj to give us a legal insight on what we can do. Over to you, Raj.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is a request from High Speed 2 Limited for the approval of plans and specifications which fall for consideration under paragraphs 2 and 3 of Schedule 17. You'll recall that the previous report dealt with paragraph 6 of Schedule 17, so this is a different part of Schedule 17. Paragraph 2 is headed Condition Relating to Building Works, and paragraph 3 is headed Condition Relating to Other Construction Works. Now, the report, which is before you this evening, contains a recommendation for approval subject to 2 conditions and 2 informatives. Informatives are what they say on the tin. They are informal, very difficult, if not impossible, to enforce, and therefore they do not feature in any shape or form in the High Speed 2 Act. Contrast the position with conditions which do feature and are explicitly contained within both paragraphs 2 and 3 of Schedule 17. Now, a very, very important distinction between paragraphs 2 and 3 and paragraph 6, which is the lorry route submission, is that the subcommittee does not require the approval or consent of High Speed 2 Limited before it can impose a condition. That is a very, very important difference between this and a paragraph 6 application. However, before the subcommittee can impose a condition, it has to be satisfied of a particular legal test, which is set out in both paragraphs 2 and 3. And Ian has already alluded to them in his presentation. I think it's important that I do just read them out again. Members of the subcommittee will now be familiar with the wording. It may only impose a condition if the design or external appearance of the building works ought to be modified to preserve the local environment or local amenity and is reasonably capable of being so modified. There are 2 other sub-criteria, which is around prejudicial effects on road safety and preserving a site of archaeological interest, but neither of those really apply here. It is all about preserving the local environment or local amenity. Now, in the officer report before you, there is an appraisal in relation to both of the proposed conditions. I would draw members' attention to page 40 of the report, which deals with the visual intrusion to one aspect of the building, and it is recommended that a condition is imposed in relation to living screens. On page 45 of the report, there is an appraisal of the scheme for the monitoring and reporting of noise and insulation. And on both those pages, there is an analysis by officers as to how the design or external appearance of both these matters can reasonably be modified and are capable of being so modified. So it's very, very important that before members agree to impose the two conditions which are recommended, they have to be satisfied as to that legal test. They can have regard to officer comments in the report, which are supplemented by the very thorough presentation which Ian Thine just gave to the subcommittee. And the final point that I would wish to make, Chairman, is that if the subcommittee is minded to impose the two conditions which are recommended, it is absolutely fundamental that both the minutes and the decision notice set out very clearly why the committee considered that the arrangements, the design or external appearance could reasonably be modified and would be capable of being modified. The reason I say this, that it's absolutely imperative that that is as watertight as possible to minimise the possibility of high-speed 2 lodging and appeal against the decision. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Again, your legal insight will help members decide where they want to go with this one. But before we open it up for debate, we have agenda item 8 up for approval with 2 conditions and 2 informatives. And you would have heard from Ian, who presented a very thorough presentation, and just from Raj about the reasonably being modified elements to the conditions being recommended. So I think we're at a point now where we can open it up to members to ask any questions. And I'll start, as ever, with the Vice Chairman, Councillor Lavery.
Thank you, Councillor Tuckwell. This set of arrangements, I would agree with the officer presentation, are broadly satisfactory. The engineering structures are what they are, and I couldn't see any way that we could ask for much modification to those other than what has been suggested. The condition in the report suggests a minor modification effectively to the side of the head house structure that will face the greenway in terms of a living wall or a green wall. Clearly that would soften the structure considerably. I would see that the structure is reasonably capable of being modified in that way. It doesn't radically change what the structure does. It just changes the external appearance of that structure. So I would view that that is a perfectly reasonable thing for us to impose upon this application. In terms of the noise, we are clearly at the moment totally reliant on modelling. We've seen a lot of modelling in recent weeks of all sorts of things. Models may or may not work at the end of the day. We have a 5-metre high screen, which is what Parliament has put in. But I would view that it is reasonable for us to ask for that to be the noise levels to be monitored appropriately, so that we do understand whether they breach the limits that have been set in the Act, and that therefore it will be reason for us then to ask for further works to be done to mitigate noise. So I would view both of those conditions have met the legal test that we've been asked to satisfy. We've had a very thorough officer presentation and very clear legal advice. to save some time in this and subject to the comments of others, I would be happy to move officer recommendations subject to conditions and informatives in the report, but I await comments from others.
Thank you, Councillor Lavery. I'll go over now to Councillor Duncan. Have you any questions or comments?
Thank you, Chairman. I agree completely with Councillor Lavery on this. We've had a very full and clear presentation by officers and a very thorough legal explanation of the situation and what we can and cannot do and why we can and cannot do certain things. So I won't repeat what Councillor Lavery said, because really he said everything that I would say. I will merely second the recommendation that we approve with the 2 conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. We will go around now and take comments from other members, and we'll start with Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this has been a very comprehensive report from the officers, and I agree with both my other colleagues, so nothing further to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brightman. Can we go over to Councillor Morgan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. No, I don't have very little to say on this. Just going back to the noise reduction wall, is there anything that we can do on landscaping on that 5-metre wall at the end of the greenway, just to try and break it up a little bit for the residents there?
Ian, can I ask you to come in there and answer that point?
Certainly, Councillor. This was raised in the past. Now, the noise barrier is an engineering structure, so it has to be regularly maintained and kept free of debris and vegetation. You'll also remember that the area between the noise barrier, High Speed 2, and the other side is the Chiltern line. So again, there has to be a very limited amount of vegetation growth between those two for health and safety reasons. So the advice we've had from HS2 is that couldn't be softened through landscaping, purely from a maintenance and structure management perspective. So in that regard, I wouldn't deem it reasonable, given that HS2 Limited have said they couldn't do it to meet their own engineering specifications. So as much as I would like to, I don't think we would be able to reasonably say that would be possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Morgan, have you got a follow-up question?
Thank you very much, Ian, for clarifying that. No, I'm quite happy to go with the officer's recommendations on this one as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Hagger.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a great report and comprehensive. I have got one question actually that I just want to clarify. Within the compound and the hard standing area that we've got for emergency and maintenance vehicles, we have got in there that there also can be used for parking. And I just wondered whether there was anything in there that would stipulate the number of cars that could actually park on there. And the reason why I'm saying that is if there was an emergency and people are coming out of there and emergency vehicles are trying to get on there and they already have their vehicles parked on there, I would suggest there might be a problem with people getting onto the hard area. So I don't know. Can you answer that question, please? Thank you, Chair.
Ian, can I throw that one to you?
Yes, certainly, Chair. So the car parking arrangements for that area are for a very minimal amount of car parking. There's 850 square metres of space, so normal car parking, so 4 metres by 3. The car parking areas are designated, I believe, for 2 different cars, but the car parking area that we're approving is for the whole 850 metres squared. The site is extremely secure, as you would expect with a high-speed line. So in that regard, there is unlikely to be any obstacles for an emergency vehicles getting to and from that site. Again, that would be for operational practice, whoever ends up operating this site. But as things stand at the minute, I don't see that there would be that problem, given this isn't a fully operational, this isn't a station, this isn't a fully operational site in the sense that staff are coming and going on a regular basis. So the access to and from is very heavily restricted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Hagger, have you got a follow-up?
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, and very well explained. So, yeah, with that, I support officers' recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go to Councillor Oswald.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, Councillor Lavery's mentioned the model. The thing is, you never know what it's going to be like. And it's the noise issue for me, because it's always going to be there, Chairman, and it's not going to go away. And it takes me back to when we were deciding on the Heathrow Express, because we had the same issues. We didn't know what it was going to be like. And I think what they did was they built a bunding, and as it happens, there was no noise from it at all. It was really, really good. But this is different. This is totally different. But yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy to go with the officer's recommendations with the conditions. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Oswald. Okay, I think again I can draw the debate to a natural conclusion. We do have the officer's recommendation moved. We do have the officer's recommendation seconded. I just will remind members when they are voting that taking into account the point about the tests that we're being asked to pass when it comes to imposing these conditions when we are voting on it. So on that note, I will go to Councillor Lavery. You moved it. I take it you're for?
I am for.
Councillor Brightman?
For, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Hagger?
For, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan?
For, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan, you seconded, but I take it you're for?
I am. Thank you. I'm for,
Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Oswald?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm for.
Okay, I might that 6 votes for officer's recommendation with the 2 conditions and 2 informatives. Liz, do you concur?
Yes, I do. That's confirmed.
Okay, I can confirm that agenda item 8 is approved with those conditions attached. Okay, right, that brings us to the end of the meeting, I think. So thank you very much for everyone that's been watching at home on YouTube. Thank you very much to members and officers for your participation this evening. And on that note, we will close the meeting down now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. If you could just remain muted for now, just while I shut down the stream, please. Thanks very much.